Hello, this is Thomas. I will be showing in this quick Blender tutorial how to 3D model the body for Wooper. All I've done at this point is I've opened up Blender and I'm still in the splash screen. If you see in the bottom left hand corner, you'll see all the key presses and all the clicks I make on the screen. I'll be going relatively slow in this tutorial, so feel free to put me on 1.5, 2.0 speed to make the process easier for you. So at this point, what we're going to want to do is make sure we've already visited the Google Drive or wherever we have our reference images stored. They should be provided. Download those and have them ready. So we're going to want to click off of this splash screen to set up a general file for in Blender. And we're going to press A to select all and delete to remove all the objects from the scene. I'm then going to rename this collection to reference images, and I'm going to add a new collection. Right click in our scene collection, new collection, drag it so it's not inside our other collection, and I'm going to rename it to Wooper. And in here, we'll be placing all our subdivided cubes and all our objects, while in here, we'll put all our reference images. So, as you'll see, our scene should be completely empty. If you still have a light or a camera or even our cube, let's go ahead and delete those by once again pressing A and delete and make sure we have nothing here. Then we're going to start adding our reference images. We can add them by pulling up the Add menu by doing Shift A, and then down here in the bottom you'll see Image, and we can go over to Reference. We can then click on Reference, and in here you should see the File menu. So in your File menu you can find your images. I'm going to start with wooperfront.jpg. Click on them and then Load Reference Image. So now that we'll see our image shows up and it pops up, but it's at a somewhat of a weird angle. So what we're going to be doing next is resetting the rotation, rotating it 90 degrees so that's perpendicular to the XY plane. Remember, if you forget our orientation, you can look up here in our top right and we have our axes labeled for our convenience. And then I'm going to move it slightly off to the side. And we're going to use this image alongside the other one to create the proportions for our Wooper and make sure it's not too deformed. So I'm going to reset the rotation of the image by selecting it, left click, then I'm going to do Alt R to reset the rotation. Then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees about the X axis by pressing R, X, 90, and we'll see it's now upright in relation to us. I'll then slide it backwards along the Y-axis so that we have some space and it's not directly on the origin. So I'll press G, Y, and then I'll just move it backwards. I'll then repeat this process for the other image, so Shift A, we'll go to Image, Reference, and then if we go down, we can add wooperside.jpg. And we'll once again see it's oriented weirdly, so we can click on it, reset the rotation by doing Alt, R, and then I'll also make it upright by doing R, X, 90. However, we want it to face in a different direction and be off to the side compared to this original image, so we can do R, Z, 90, and we'll see it's now facing the other direction. We rotate it 90 degrees about the Z axis. And then I'll also move it off to the side, this time about the X axis though, so I'll do G, X, and slide it backwards. And you'll see that currently our images are not in the correct folder, so I will select these two and drag them into our reference image folder. And at this point, now that we have some progress, let's go ahead and save. So we can do that by going to File, Save As, and then we can give it a title and put it somewhere you will remember, such as your documents or desktop. Now that it's saved, we'll see we have our title up here in our left hand side, and whenever we make something and it's no longer currently saved, we'll see we have an asterisk up here. So we can save, and I very highly recommend saving thoroughly as we move throughout this project by doing Control S. And we'll see the asterisk disappears, meaning we have the latest version saved and no new changes have been made. Alright, so now we're going to start blocking out the body. So we can add a new cube by doing Shift A, going to Mesh, and then hitting Cube. And we'll see we have a new one in the very center of our scene. Now that we have our cube, the first thing we're going to want to do is add a subdivision surface. So we can easily doing that by pressing Ctrl 3, and we'll see it gets rounded out and we have a level 3 subdivision surface. We can see in more detail how it's been applied by going to our Properties tab and going down to Modifier Properties. And as we'll see, we have a Catmull-Clark subdivision, which is what we want, with a level 3 subdivision, and we can deselect Optimal Display. Then we can go to the top right and change our viewport shading to wireframe mode, and if it isn't already selected, toggle X-ray. Alright, our next step is I will be pressing numpad 1, and we should be viewing our cube, and in the background we can see our reference image. Then I'll switch to edit mode by pressing tab, and we'll see we see our vertices, and I will be switching from selection from box select to lasso. This is up to you, however. Remember, you can cycle through them by pressing the W key. However, now if we move a point, we'll see the mesh, which is in gray/black here, also deforms. So we're going to press A to select all the vertices, G to move, and then move it down slightly. And then we can also scale it down uniformly by pressing S and dragging it inwards. I'll move it down a bit more by pressing GZ, moving it downwards, and now we have it in the general location of where we want it to be. We can also scale it up slightly. We're using the reference image more as a general guide and not following it to the letter. So we can then go to face select by pressing 3, right, and we should see face selected up here. We can go to the top and select the topmost face. And we can move around to make sure we've selected the correct face. If we return to numpad 1, we can then press E for extrude, move it upwards slightly, and then press S, scale it down until we achieve a teardrop shape. What will then likely be the case is that this top part is way too high, so then we can go back to vertex selection by pressing 1, take this top part, select it, and then do G, Z, and bring it downward slightly more. We can also then move these two top points down a bit more for us. Now, if we go into 3D, we can see that, and as we move around, we have a general blob-like shape. And now this part is more artistic interpretation, and we just want to make sure it looks natural from all sides. And I would highly recommend turning on, if you see the butterfly icon here, X-axis symmetry, so that when we move a point on this side, it will also move on the other side with respect to the X-axis. Now you just want to move your vertices around to make sure you have a natural looking shape and that it doesn't look too deformed from any of the angles. At this point, I don't feel like there are any major revisions that need to be made. However, I will squash it slightly along the Y-axis by pressing S, Y, moving it in a little bit, and then also a bit along the Z-axis by pressing S, Z, moving it in a little bit. So now, if we detoggle X-ray mode and go to Material Preview, Solid, right? We should see we have our body for the Wooper. And if we move around, it should look pretty natural. Alright, our next step will be adding feet. These sections down here. So we can once again then go to Shift, a Mesh, add a cube, and add a level 3 subdivision surface. And then we will elongate it along the y-axis by pressing S, Y, and moving it outwards so that we get a bean-like shape. We're trying to mimic this and then we'll position it. So that looks pretty good to me, so I'll then scale it down so it's more to size. Around there looks fine, and then I'll move it down into position G, Z, move it down, and then I can, if I snap using Control Numpad 7, move it around here, and then I'll also rotate it so it's facing outwards. And then move it up a tiny bit, and then just adjust it minor. And throughout this entire process, you can always adjust and revise your model. Okay, and then I'm going to be introducing a brand new modifier so that we don't have to repeat the same process on the other side. So we can mirror it to the other side. I will apply all of the transformations, because if we see here, our object origin is not at the center axis. So I will do Control A, all transforms, and now we see our object center for this foot is back in the origin. I can then go to modifiers, press search, and then go and search for mirror. Now if I hit enter, you'll see we have 2 feet right there. And we can also, if for some reason you're not able to reset the object origin, we can also mirror across an object. And yes, so now we have completed the feet. The one remaining thing of the core body before we move on to the head is the tail. So at this point, you're probably getting the hang of it. We will once again Shift A, go to Mesh, add a cube, add a level 3 subdivision surface, Control 3, and then we can scale it down slightly, snap to the side this time, Numpad 3, and then we can move it around here and scale it down a bit. However, if we'll see, it would be a lot easier to model the tail if we didn't have these in the way. So I'm going to go here, and then if we see in our scene collection, we can press the I button and this will hide it in the viewport. I can also re-click it so that it'll come back, but for now I will hide the body and the feet so I can get a better view at the tail. So I will go to edit mode, once again go to wireframe and X-ray select, and then deselect optimal display. Then I will scale it down, and I can zoom in, then zoom in our image, and I will be roughly tracing the outline of this tail from our side image using the vertices. So I can move it using G, scale it down, and then I can select these 2 vertices here, press E to extrude, and now we'll see we get more vertices to work with. So then I'll just move these vertices around to form the general shape. From now we're only going to worry about this one perspective, this one side perspective, and then we will make it look good, add proper thickness from other sides. So now we've got the general shape at this base here. We can press E to extrude, add more vertices. And what you'll see is that as we add more vertices, the geometry of our object in sections where we already moved the vertices will probably change. So a lot of this process is going back and then adjusting points we already had by selecting them, G, moving them around. We can then once again, one final time, select the 2 edge vertices, E to extrude, and then scale them down, and then move the other vertices around so that we can then roughly trace the shape of the tail. And yeah, this process may seem a bit tedious to you, but trust me, it gets a lot faster. So now we can return to viewing it from multiple angles, and you'll see our tail. If we go back to material preview, solid, right, exit, edit mode, and then bring back our other 2 body parts, our tail looks absurdly thin in comparison to the others. So I'll re-hide these very quickly by pressing H, and here I will bring back our tail and I will increase the thickness along the x-axis. So I can do shift, or I can select a vertex here. I'll do shift, select another one over here, and then here. And I'm using Alt to select the edge loops, something we discussed in the original class, right? To wrap around this entire thing. So then I'll press S, X, and scale it so that we get some nice thickness. Then I'll proceed to do the same with this one, pressing Alt, and then pressing these edge loops. And now we have our edge face selected, and we can also give that some width along the x-axis by pressing S, X, and then making it a bit thicker. And we'll see, now if we return to this preview, it may be looking abnormally thick. One thing to take into consideration is that a lot of time references aren't perfectly from the side view, so we can adjust it so that it looks more natural in a 3D scene by going to wireframe and then moving these up a bit so it doesn't look as thick. Remember to select X-ray so that we can click through the entire object. Select the points in the back. And then this entire process essentially boils down to just moving these points around and fine-tuning it. So now if we exit edit mode, return to solid, and then bring back our others, you'll see our tail seems to be embedded a bit too much into our body. So I'll go snap to using control numpad 3 and I'll drag it out a bit. And I can also scale it up a tiny bit, move it around, and now we'll see we have our body. I'll move it a tiny bit outwards more so that we get that taper near the base, and yeah. So now we have our feet, our body, and our tail. And the next part of this short mini-series will be focusing on creating Wooper's head and on its gills especially. And please remember, if you're watching this in class, raise your hand if you have any questions. Dr. Bernal and I will be glad to help. Especially I will be walking around during this period to make sure everybody is doing well. Thank you.